On July 12, 1986, Officer Stephen McDonald questioned a group of teenagers suspected of stealing bikes in Central Park. During the interaction, 15-year-old Shavod Jones shot McDonald 3 times. Sadly, one of the bullets severed McDonald's spinal cord, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down and dependent on a respirator for the rest of his life. That day, McDonald lost nearly all of his independence and began the long journey of learning how to rely on others. Unsurprisingly, McDonald was overcome with anger, bitterness, and hatred. At the time of the shooting, McDonald had been married for 8 months, and his 23-year-old wife was 3 months pregnant with their first child. When his son was born 6 months later, McDonald knew he needed to let go of the destructive thoughts and emotions that had taken over his life, because if he didn't, he knew he couldn't be the loving father and husband he wanted to be. So McDonald held a press conference with his wife, announcing that he'd forgiven the young man who shot him, and shortly after, McDonald began writing to Jones in prison. At first, Jones didn't write back, but eventually the two became friends. In the end, Jones apologized, and when he did, McDonald shared his dream of traveling the country with Jones to share what the experience taught them. If you're in awe at this point of the story, you're not alone. For many, achieving this level of forgiveness and acceptance might seem impossible or even pointless, but that's not true. Studies show that forgiveness can improve both your mental and physical health, and with the right approach, many people can learn to forgive. So, in this video, I'll teach you what forgiveness is, why it's helpful, and most importantly, how to forgive. Let's get started. Let's start by talking about what forgiveness is and isn't. Many people associate forgiveness with weakness, and for the longest time, I did too. And I think that's because forgiveness is often misunderstood. Most of us have our first experience with forgiveness when we're young. So maybe your brother stole your favorite toy, or your sister put glue in your hair. And when these things happen, your parents often ask you to forgive and then play together as if nothing happened. And it's this play together as if nothing happened part that causes the misunderstanding. Many people believe that forgiveness means letting the other person off the hook and being okay with what they did. Additionally, we tend to think that if we forgive someone, that we have to keep that person in our lives regardless of what happened. But that's an unrealistic expectation to keep, especially as we age. As you mature, so does the severity of grievances you encounter. Stolen Hot Wheels become affairs, dishonest business partners, and acts of violence. In these cases, accepting the behavior and keeping the offender in your life seems like a weak and powerless thing to do, and in many cases, it is. The good news here is forgiveness has nothing to do with the other person. So if you forgive someone, that doesn't mean you approve their behavior or have to keep them in your life. What's important to understand here is forgiveness is for you. Let me explain. Your mind has a limited capacity for attention, which means you can only give your full attention to one thing at a time. Therefore, if you continually focus on being angry or resentful, then you lose the ability to focus on the positive things in life. And unfortunately, people can spend a lifetime stuck in this trap. For example, some people never trust again after being cheated on, and as a result, they miss out on the opportunity to have a loving and meaningful relationship with someone else. And as you saw with Officer Stephen McDonald, when he focused on being angry at Jones, it affected how he treated his family. Ultimately, forgiveness works because it creates space in your mind. By letting go of destructive thoughts and emotions, you make it possible to focus on things that matter. Okay, let's talk about how to forgive. Knowing that forgiveness is good for you doesn't make it easy, and that's because forgiveness is largely emotional in nature. So logically, forgiveness makes sense, but emotionally, forgiveness can feel like the mental equivalent of climbing Mount Everest. To help you overcome this challenge, I want to share 6 ideas that can help you forgive. Idea number 1 is ask if you've actually been harmed. To forgive, you have to feel harmed, and to feel harmed, you have to believe that something is harmful. But just because something feels harmful doesn't make it true. Let me explain. What you consider harmful is personal because it's based on your beliefs. For example, one woman might be upset because her husband had lunch with a female colleague. Another woman might not. In this case, the same scenario has a different outcome because the women have different beliefs. In short, the only reason things feel harmful is because you believe they are. Knowing this, the first step towards forgiveness is often evaluating if you have a valid reason to feel harmed. And you can do that by asking yourself the following 3 questions. Here's question number 1. Is it true? Surprisingly, many people feel harmed before they check the facts. To give you an example, I once dated a girl who believed I was dating another woman, and she held that belief because she saw a picture of me online from a past relationship. As a result, she felt harmed and then unnecessarily ended the relationship. Ultimately, the main point here is simple. Before you feel harmed, be sure to check the facts. Question number 2 is, are you being reasonable? At times, we hold ourselves and others to unreasonable standards. For example, some parents expect their children to receive perfect grades. The problem with setting such high standards is they're nearly impossible to achieve. As a result, few things meet your expectations, making almost everything feel harmful. To avoid this problem, it's important to remind yourself that nobody's perfect, and then ask yourself if your expectations take this fact into consideration. In doing so, if you realize that you're holding people to unattainable standards, then you can reduce the chance that you'll feel harmed by recalibrating your expectations. So to give you an example, instead of asking your children to receive perfect grades, you might ask them to work hard while trying their best. And question number 3 is, do your beliefs help you build the type of life you want to live? Sometimes we hold on to beliefs that no longer serve us. To give an example, assume you had an overly conservative mother who led you to believe that it's immoral for married women to interact with other men. Then assume that you're married to a modern-day woman who's an attorney. If you hold on to the belief that it's immoral for married women to interact with other men, then you'll feel harmed every time she goes to work. And as a result, you'll make it nearly impossible to have a happy marriage. You can avoid this problem by asking yourself if your beliefs help you build the type of life you want to live. If not, then you'll benefit from updating your beliefs. The second idea that can help you forgive is consider the intention. There's a big difference between making an honest mistake and being intentionally hurtful, and you should consider this when trying to forgive someone. So to give you an example, maybe a friend offended you, but they were just trying to be funny. Or maybe a coworker put the wrong date in their calendar and missed a meeting. When these things happen, it's helpful to remind yourself that people make mistakes, because doing so can help the offense feel less harmful. Also, don't forget that it won't be long before you make a similar mistake. And when you do, you'll hope that people are equally understanding. Idea number 3 is empathize. Empathy helps with forgiveness because it allows you to understand what other people think and feel, which can help you understand their behavior. To practice empathy, you envision yourself in someone else's shoes and imagine how they felt. Then you try to understand how that feeling motivated their behavior. So for example, maybe your teenage daughter just had her heart broken, and as a result, she was rude at dinner. Or maybe your husband forgot your anniversary right after losing his job. The reason empathy is helpful is because it allows you to separate the person from the behavior, which can make the experience feel less harmful. It also helps you see that few people are inherently bad, and what's more likely is that good people occasionally make mistakes. So if your daughter was rude after having her heart broken, that doesn't mean she's a terrible person. And if your husband forgot your anniversary after losing his job, that doesn't mean he has no redeeming qualities as a spouse. Unfortunately, while empathy sounds good in theory, it can be very hard to practice, especially if you don't like the person you're trying to forgive. Thankfully, if you're struggling to empathize, the following 2 tips can help. Tip number 1 is focus on similarities, not differences. When someone hurts you, it's easy to let the us versus them narrative run wild. And when you do this, you drive a wedge between yourself and the person you're trying to forgive. And this makes it nearly impossible to empathize with them. Thankfully, you can prevent this problem by looking for similarities between yourself and the person who hurt you. So let me give you an example. Let's say someone broke into your car and you're trying to forgive that person. And in the process, you discover that this guy was an unemployed father who was trying to feed his children. Well, in this case, it's easy to put yourself in this guy's shoes and imagine how he felt. And you can even ask yourself if you might also do something that you wouldn't be proud of if you had to feed your children. Now, to be clear, I'm not asking you to be okay with theft. I'm just showing you that putting yourself in someone else's shoes can help soften the blow. And as a result, that can minimize the destructive thoughts and emotions that consume your mind. The second idea that can help you empathize is take note of how they respond. Most people feel terrible when they make a mistake and make some attempt to right their wrongs. So they might apologize, work overtime, or be willing to learn from the experience and become a better person. If you notice this type of behavior, then it's likely you're dealing with a good person who made a mistake. And with this in mind, it's a lot easier to forgive. The fourth idea that can help you forgive is speak up. In many cases, people won't realize they're harming you, and if you don't speak up, it's unlikely that things will change. So for example, maybe you don't like how your boyfriend treats you when he's around his friends, or maybe your boss continually takes credit for your work. When you find yourself in these situations, it's your job to speak up. To do that, tell the other person how you feel and what you hope will change moving forward. Now, thankfully, in most cases, these type of heart-to-heart conversations resolve the problem, which makes you feel better, and as a result, makes forgiving easier. All right, idea number 5 for learning how to forgive is set boundaries. Unfortunately, there will be times when people refuse to change their behavior. So maybe you have a wife who continues to be unfaithful, or maybe you have a brother who keeps showing up to family events high. In these situations, it helps to distance yourself from the other person by setting boundaries. Boundaries are effective because they establish guidelines, and when well defined, boundaries do 2 things. First, boundaries set the rules, and second, boundaries define the consequences of breaking those rules. To help you understand this concept, here are 3 examples of effective boundaries. 1. If you continue to be unfaithful, I will file for divorce. 2. You are not welcome at family events when you're high. And 3. If my boss continues to disrespect me at work, I will quit and find a new job. Now, what's important to remember here is that setting a boundary doesn't mean you have to remove someone from your life forever. That might be necessary, but more often than not, setting a boundary says, you're welcome in my life if you abide by these rules. Ultimately, boundaries help you forgive for 2 reasons. First, boundaries break the cycle of continually being harmed. And second, boundaries encourage the person harming you to make a positive change. Finally, the 6th idea that can help you forgive is refocus. Sometimes the things that happen to you are so harmful that it feels nearly impossible to forgive. So for example, maybe your child was killed by a drunk driver, perhaps you were sexually abused, or maybe you live in a country ravaged by war. Sadly, these traumatic experiences will likely stay with you for the rest of your life. After all, losing a child is not something that you simply get over. But while these experiences will always be challenging, they don't have to define the rest of your life. In other words, there's value in learning how to both manage your pain and move your life forward in a positive direction. That's because feeling angry and resentful for the rest of your life won't change the past, and hanging on to these emotions will only make the rest of your life less enjoyable. Now, this is incredibly hard to do, and I'm not trying to make light of your situation, but finding the rose in a bed of thorns is beneficial. So if you find yourself in this position, here are 2 tips that can help you refocus your attention on the type of things that will improve your life. Tip number 1 is let your pain fuel positive change. On May 3rd, 1980, Candace Leitner's 13-year-old daughter was hit and killed by a drunk driver. Only 4 days later, Leitner founded MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Today, MAD receives $40 million in annual funding and estimates that they've cut incidents of drunk driving in half. Now, none of these efforts will bring back Leitner's daughter, but her ability to take positive action despite her pain undoubtedly improved her life and the lives of others. The second tip that can help you refocus on the positive is reframe your experience. Google conducted an experiment with 12,000 people called the Eraser Test, and every person in the test had experienced a significant traumatic event at some point in their life. During the test, participants were given the following directions. 1. Write down your traumatic event. 2. Imagine that you could erase this event from your life. Not just the memory of the event, but the entire event. 3. Keep in mind that if you erase the event, you will also erase everything that has happened because of the event. Every friend you've met, every learning experience, and every resilience you've developed. And 4. Ask yourself if you would erase the event. Surprisingly, 99.99% of people said they would not erase the event. And even the person who conducted the experiment, Mo Gaudat, said he would not erase the death of his 21-year-old son because it inspired him to create the nonprofit 1 Billion Happy. What Gaudat concluded from the experiment is most of our strengths and qualities are the result of our difficult moments, not the easy ones. And for the most part, people like who their struggles have helped them become. So if you're currently struggling, keep the Eraser Test in mind. It might not feel like it at the moment, but there's a 99.99% chance that you'll be proud of who your trauma helps you become. Okay, before I go, I want to leave you with 2 final cautions about forgiveness. First, people often believe that forgiveness will take away their pain, but that's not a realistic outcome. Unfortunately, if you've experienced something traumatic, there's a good chance that the memory of that event will resurface for the rest of your life. When this happens, it's important to accept that it's normal to feel pain from time to time, and then commit to moving your life forward in a positive direction. And if you can do this, there's a good chance you'll keep your life on track. The second caution I want to leave you with is a reminder to never forget the lesson. So it's important to remember that forgiving does not mean forgetting what happened. And that's because most things worth forgiving teach a lesson. So if you get taken advantage of in business or your significant other cheats on you, then you want to try to learn from the experience, because doing so can reduce the odds that it will happen again. In the end, I hope all of these ideas are helpful the next time you need to forgive. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, it would be great if you could subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Now, if you want more information like this, I highly recommend you check out my meditation app, Aware. I've linked to it below in the description. Thank you, and I'll see you soon.